All right, welcome to Get NIST-y, the series that breaks compliance out of the checkbox trap and turns it into a real security advantage. No fluff, no FUD, just practical strategies to make compliance work for your MSP. I'm Jared Casner, and I'm joined as always by my co-founder of Blacksmith InfoSec and co-host of Get NIST-y, Michael Zbarsky.
Hey everyone.
Today, we're going to dive into how compliance can be more than a burden, it can be a business advantage. This is a topic that has come up a few times for us. We're going to dig into it a little bit more with some very specific questions from some of our listeners here. So, Mike, do you want to go ahead and read the first question for today?
Sure. Hey, Get NIST-y team. This is Wendy. I run an MSP out of Scottsdale. I assume Arizona, but maybe it's a different Scottsdale. Many of my clients say they want compliance, but what they really mean is help us pass an audit. How can I reframe the conversation so leadership understands compliance as a risk reduction and business protection instead of just a checkbox exercise? Jared, you
Ooh.
want to take a first swing at this one?
Yeah, there's a lot to unpack here. I mean, I have seen companies pass audits that are not very secure. I've seen companies that take the audits very seriously. Getting through an audit as cheaply as possible is often a recipe for cutting a lot of corners. And so I think, Wendy, you are absolutely thinking about this the right way in the sense that you really do want to be thinking about this as the overarching security program and how do you set a client up for long-term success. Wow, unpacking this one. Let's see. So let's talk about what it means to even talk about risk reduction, right? At the end of the day, you're never going to be able to get your client to zero risk. I don't even know what zero. We talk about quantifying risk. What is zero risk? What is 11 risk? What is 400 risk? I don't know. Like risk scores are always sort of arbitrary things anyhow. So I would just encourage you to think about it as while things are happening at the business, there's always going to be some risk of something bad happening, right? How you quantify that, as long as you are consistent, is going to be one of the ways that you're going to really bridge that gap most effectively with your clients is finding some way of quantifying that information, whether you're using the FAIR Institute or just arbitrary risk calculations, summing up all of your residual risk scores, whatever approach that you take, having some standardized mechanism for scoring those risks, and then talking about what individual actions can do to reduce that risk is going to be really valuable. But I feel like I'm going down a rabbit hole here on risk scoring without actually coming anywhere close to answering your question, Wendy. So let me pause here, Mike. Help me frame this a little bit differently so that we can have this conversation with poor Wendy here before I go too far down the rabbit hole.
So there's a couple of pieces here, and first of all, I want to kind of go back to something that Jared said and something that we say all the time. You can be secure without being compliant, and you can be compliant without being secure. They kind of go hand in hand. There's a Venn diagram somewhere where there's a happy medium where you can be compliant and secure. The idea here really is to kind of have the business dictate what their risk appetite is, and it's going to be different for every business, right? Startups are going to be able to accept a lot more risk than a Northrop Grumman or some other DoD massive contractor, right? Or a Bank of America or someone else. And so they're also not going to be able to spend as much as a Bank of America, et cetera, on their controls. And so a lot of this really is aligning the risk appetite and the security program to that risk appetite and making sure that the company is making knowledgeable decisions, right? I've seen in my career where people go to the business and they say, hey, you shouldn't do this. And the business says, well, we really need to. And they're like, well, the answer is no, you're not going to do this. Well, again, this goes back to security becoming a department of no, which is not the idea here. The idea is to say, cool, you need to do this. Let's figure out how we can do this in the least risky way possible. One of the examples I like to bring up when I talk about it is my background was in commercial real estate originally. When I was growing up in my career, I worked in IT, and we would have computers that were too old to run most current Windows operating systems, but we couldn't upgrade them because they were also running the elevators, and it wasn't upgrading a $1,000 computer. It was, hey, now you need to upgrade a $200,000 elevator bank. And so we couldn't go to the business and say, no, you have to upgrade this. What we could do is put in mitigations, right? Put in some VLAN, block access to the internet for it, make sure that it's not talking to anything else, like shut down all the USB ports on it. This was back before shutting USB ports was fashionable. But there was risk mitigations we could put in place to help minimize that risk and help kind of say, cool, we'll still do this, but limit the risk. And so to your question, Wendy, having the risk conversation, have the business risk conversation, right? You'll get the compliance. Compliance is going to fall into it, but really understand the business, understand what keeps people up at night, understand what they care about, because I can tell you a lot of your clients that say they care about compliance don't. They care about business risk, and that's why they want to pass the audit, right? But they do care about other aspects of business risk, whether it's, hey, what happens if we can't get people into the building? Oh, sounds like you want to work on your BCDR plan. Guess what? Part of compliance. Or, hey, we care about property theft. Cool. You care about physical security. Guess what? Part of compliance. And so all of this is going to tie back either way, right? If you have, I don't know, I think on our podcast that we did with Adam, we talked about the dentist office, where dentist office really don't like putting in security or doing compliance. And we talked about, cool, talk to them what happens if they can't see patients in their office. Oh, well, let's put a reciprocal agreement in place between you and a dentist across town where if something happens, you can send your patients there. And now you as the MSP need to make sure that their data is available there. And all that stuff kind of goes into the, hey, how do we continue operations in BCDR? So again, a lot of this really is actually talking to the business and working with the business, understanding what do they care about, and then tying that back to the security program. And this kind of goes back to not doing security for the sake of security. This goes back to doing security for the sake of enabling the business, making sure you're taking care of stuff that the business actually cares about. And the more you do that, the more you're going to get back from your clients. Oh, this is really cool. What else can we do? Oh, well, we're working towards CIS IG2, and here's stuff that's still missing, and it's on your risk register. We've been kind of kicking the can down the road because we've had higher priorities, stuff that's more risky, stuff that you care about more. But let's talk about these other things. And so I think having that kind of more holistic conversation about business risk with the clients will go a long way to get them out of the, hey, how do I pass this checkbox in the most non-secure way possible, to, hey, how do I actually build security and build resiliency into my business so that I can continue functioning in the way that I want to function and doing the business processes that I need to do to maintain my business.
Yep.
And
yeah, and so yeah, so Mike, let me touch on a couple of things that you comment on a couple of things that you touched on there. So I heard you use the word security program. I used that earlier. Oftentimes, Wendy, if you reframe this less as a compliance initiative and more as a security program initiative and talk about it, I'll use Mike's word, holistically, right? If you think about this as, if you're going in and selling an endpoint detection and response system or antivirus, and then going in and selling 1Password, and then going in and selling pick your next tool. If you're doing these point solutions over and over again, you're going to give your decision maker at your client a lot of decision fatigue. They're going to be coming to you saying, but Wendy, I thought you already plugged that hole, right? We've already done all that. If you instead can talk about this holistically and say, let's talk about your overall security program. Let's talk about the things that we're going to do to help your business run securely. And pick your cybersecurity framework, whether it's NIST cybersecurity framework or CIS or whatever framework you want to align to, and say, here's the overarching goal of where we're going to go. We're not going to do that tomorrow or next week or even next year potentially. We're going to do that over time. And to Mike's point, we're going to talk about the specific risks in that we're trying to mitigate and which of those risks are most important and impactful to your business. And so we have kind of our own list of, hey, if we turn on MFA, we can reduce the risk of phishing and things like that, right? So we have our perspective on what is going to reduce risk for you most effectively. But there are also risks that you care about that won't necessarily be at the top of our list, but that we do need to make sure of. And so, aligning that overall security framework to the business and driving things that way. Again, calling it that security program, and tell your client, actually, let's push compliance off to the side for a second here, right? And I think Mike said this really well. Compliance will come if you are doing all the things. If you are aligning to a security framework, compliance will come along the way by virtue of doing the right things. But when you also start with that overall security program and say, here's the end state, here's where we're going, then it becomes a little bit less decision fatigue, right? It's instead of saying, hey, I'm going to sell you the EDR solution today and the backup solution tomorrow, and right, instead of feeling like they're getting hit by this drumbeat, they already know these things are coming. And what you're doing with them is talking through the not just the sequencing, but the timing of those, right? So, hey, backup today is relatively important, but you know what? I don't want to spend all the money that it takes to get a proper 3-2-1 backup system in place with offsite storage and hard copies and this, that, and the other thing. What I want to do is I want backup so that I can get back up and running tomorrow, but I don't need to have all the fancy bells and whistles with it. Okay, great. You're going to take your risk from, again, I'm going to use made up numbers here. You're going to take your risk from 25 risk for bad backups to 15 risk for bad, because you're putting in some mitigations, but you're not going to get it to 0 risk for bad backups. You're going to reduce that. And so you say, all right, we're going to do that first step today, and we're going to punt on the rest of that, and we'll get to the additional backup and replication of your backups later. But you can have that conversation and be structured about things. And the more structured you are, the less you're going to feel like your clients are going to feel like you're nickel and diming them. They're going to understand what that end goal looks like, and they're going to work with you along the way. And they're going to understand that you're putting their business best interest at heart, because you're doing this in a structured approach, and you're telling them and I say finish line. I hate the word finish line when it comes to compliance or security, right? There's no finish line, but you're telling them what a suitable end state will look like and helping them manage that journey along the way.
Yeah, no, and there was one thing that you said, Jared, that I liked, and I think it's that piece where keeping track of everything, right? Because a lot of MSPs we talk to, they say, "Oh yeah, we discuss all these like lack of MFA, lack of control, lack of what we want to do in our QBRs," and I was like, "Cool, what happens after that?" Well, then we have the next QBR, and we say, "Hey, like we looked at our notes and we re-added it to this one," but if you have a way to track something along with the client in a co-managed way, right, where you can say, hey, here's the risk register, here's the controls that we have in place, that we don't have in place, that we want to do when we want to do it, and have that bi-directional visibility, then that there's going to be a bunch of controls that your client has to do, and it enables you to keep them accountable more easily. And likewise, there's going to be stuff that you're going to want to do that your client is going to want to hold you accountable to make sure you're actually making the progress. And this way, just again, having and maintaining a risk register with your client, however you do that, whether it's a shared Excel sheet or in a platform or whatever it happens to be, enables you guys to keep that visibility and track, hey, John, the client, is going to own this risk because something they're not ready to do, and that's fine. That's perfectly fine. We cannot stress that enough. It is okay to have risk. But that way, John's going to be responsible for this. You can add notes. You can track it until you either put mitigations in place. Maybe it's something that, again, as SMB, small business, they can't afford to do today. Fine. Put in a note. Hey, we're going to budget for this for 2027. Move on. In 2027, or as you're getting close to the budgeting season, ping them on this. Hey, John, plan in January was to, or I guess it's almost March now, but plan in February was to go ahead and budget this for 2027. Just wanted to remind you to make sure that you add this to your budget. And he has that same visibility. So ideally, John's also staying on top of it. But really, you guys as MSPs cannot own the security program for your client. They have to own it. You can't own their risk. You have to work hand in hand with your clients in a way to co-manage their security program and their risk to get them to a more robust solution, to be compliant, to be whatever.
Yep. Yeah, it's shifting the conversation from no risk to no unmanaged risk, right? It's if you're not talking about the risks to the business, if you're not talking about these things, then you're not managing those risks at all, and you're doing yourself and your client a disservice. And so, how do you work together to co-manage that risk with the business? Help them understand which aspects of the risks they have to manage themselves versus the things that you can help them with management on. Again, with the understanding, to Mike's point, that you can't own the risk for them. They have to own the risk. You can help them manage it. Cool. Well, I think we have beat this topic up pretty significantly today. So I'm going to put a pin in this one. Wendy, if you have any follow-up questions, please reach back out to us. We're happy to dig into a little bit more deeply. And quite frankly, Wendy, if you want, we can even have you on and we'll go into more detail with you live, and that way you can get your questions answered directly. But let's go ahead and shift gears over to question number 2 today. This one comes from Frank. Frank has no location, but Frank says he's starting to look at compliance offerings for his MSP and is curious. If a client has limited budget and maturity, where should I truly start? Policies, tools, risk assessment, or controls? Which sequencing actually produces visible progress without overwhelming the organization? Um, Frank, I'm going to tell you the short answer is yes. Which one makes the most sense for your client? Well, it kind of depends on the client, right? It's one of those. If you don't do a risk assessment, how are you going to understand where they are? If they already have policies, that's a good place to start with the risk assessment. If they don't have policies, then the risk assessment is essentially already done for you, where it's, hey, there's a lot of risk, because if you haven't said what you're going to be doing, then you don't really have a good way of quantifying that risk in a lot of ways, right? And so there are things that you can look at and say, yeah, we're doing this stuff even though we don't have a policy for it. But all of these things are pretty tightly tied together. I can see Mike's face here. He vehemently disagrees with me about some of what I just said, which is okay. But the short answer is start somewhere, and you're going to be a lot happier than starting nowhere or wondering which place you should start with. Now, Mike, tell me where I got it wrong, or more specifically, tell Frank where he can get it right.
Yeah, no, I don't think you got it wrong. I think there's I think there's some delineation here with like where in the process you are. So, for example, if you're looking at a potential new client, doing a risk assessment is where I would start. Right, you're not going to be doing stuff in place. Do the risk assessment with them. First of all, it helps because it'll show that you're more mature. You kind of understand risk. It doesn't have to be super high level, deep one. It can be relatively high level, but that'll also help you as you're quoting stuff to them to say, hey, we need to do A, B, C, D, E. So if you're looking to either take a new client on, start with the risk assessment. If and Frank, I don't know how mature your organization is, but if you're looking to move a client again from break fix into full MSP offering, doing a risk assessment makes a lot of sense. Doing a risk assessment on an existing MSP client is also helpful, but realistically, at least from a technical controls perspective, from the technical controls you manage, you already know a lot of those answers. Where it gets interesting is the stuff that you don't manage. And we see this all the time, right? It's hey, this client needs to do MFA. I've turned MFA on for their 365 tenants. We're good. But they're not really good because they don't have MFA on their QuickBooks or other accounting system, or on their HRIS system, or their EMR system or EHR system, right? And so having those conversations of and understanding that you guys as an MSP don't manage everything for the client. You manage what you manage, and then your job is to ideally come along and poke the client with a sharp stick to say, hey, have you thought of this stuff or the stuff we're not managing, and guide them on that compliance journey. So if it was me, I would, again, new client or moving client from break fix into MSP, definitely start with the risk assessment, because it's going to be a mess either way. You're going to need to figure out what you're dealing with. As far as if you're already providing services, from a MSP technical controls perspective, you already know what you're doing. Doing a risk assessment on that part doesn't help. What it can help with is letting the client know what they're missing out on, right? Hey, let's go through this risk assessment and identify key risks. And if you, I don't know if you, how often you listen to our podcast, Frank, but Jared and I are very much against FUD, which is fear, uncertainty, and doubt, and selling with FUD. And so the point of the risk assessment is not to show a bunch of red lights and everything's on fire and dear God, you need to dump $3 million to fix everything. The point of it is to say, hey, um, you've got some risks. Some of them may be acceptable because of your level of maturity, and some may not be. And also, here is where you're doing really well. Here's where you're really mature in your organization and in the business process. Um, and so that piece is very huge because, again, that's going to build trust where the client isn't going to say, oh, you're just trying to scare me into this. I'm not. I'm here to say, hey, doing well here, and you need some more work here. Um, and so that's that piece. When you're trying to get them to compliance and get them build national security program as you're going to try to offer, starting with policies, realistically, you and your client need to come to some sort of agreement of what are we actually going to do? What are we going to strive for? You're going to need to come to agreement on the frameworks that they care about. And again, it doesn't always have to be regulated. It can be CIS just to build the security program. It can be NIST CSF. It can be whatever. And you're going to need that executive sponsorship to agree to those policies to say, yes, we're actually going to do this. That way, as you're marching towards this, you can call your client and say, hey, you said we're going to do this. John in accounting is not doing this right now. I'm not here to babysit John. Guess whose job that is?
Yep.
Mr. Executive or Mrs. Executive Sponsor. And so that's kind of where I was. That was my face, Jared, as you were talking. Was there's like a delineation of like where in the process you are, but the policies really are kind of the foundation of the security program, and you want to get those in place. Again, that becomes your kind of contractual agreement with your client of, hey, this is what we want to work towards. And as Jared likes to say, he's slowly convincing me, is compliance breaks down into three things, right? Say it, do it, prove it. And so the policies are going to be the say it, and then you can start working, again, not just you, the do it becomes you and your client, because there's going to be a bunch of stuff they need to do, but the doing it, getting the technical controls, the administrative controls, etc. in place, and then just collecting evidence, again, depending on if they need to go through some sort of audit or just collecting evidence from both sides just to validate, yes, we actually configured this correctly. Hey, we've uploaded our evidence from Microsoft of MFA, but guess what? You guys need to go log into Epic and upload your evidence from Epic. The MFA is enforced as well because, again, this is very much I don't know. The last question we discussed, Jared didn't like my holistic approach. He's like, I'm going to use Mike's word of holistic. But it is. It becomes a holistic security program, right? You're not securing what you're responsible for. You're building a security program for the business. And that becomes something that you do in tandem with your clients.
No, I actually loved the word holistic, which is why I used your word. Right? At the end of the day, it's you can't build this with it. If you're trying to build a building without a blueprint, you're going to fail. You might get something small and rudimentary like a tree fort for your kids without some sort of blueprint. But if you're trying to build a house or a building, and that's really what your security program is it's a lot more sophisticated than the tree fort in your backyard. And if you're just doing a tree fort, there's only so much security that you can possibly put on your tree fort, right?
You haven't seen my tree fort. We've got a moat. We've got alligators.
But the point is, if you're trying to build something secure and robust and it's going to last, you want to start with a framework. You want to start with that blueprint that says what you're going to do. And so again, to Mike's point, that's where that say it comes in. That's where building the policies and writing those policies to be aspirational and say, this is where we're going, helps you significantly. So otherwise what you end up with is that unmanaged risk. If you write your policies for what you're doing today, then there's a whole bunch of things that you're not doing that are not included in the policies. And so what that means is either every time you update what you're doing, You need to also update your policies, which gives your end users some fatigue about how frequently your policies are being updated. Or your policies aren't getting updated, which means that they're not in sync with what you're actually doing. And so you can't, when somebody is violating those policies, you can't slap them on the hand and say there's a problem. But it also means that unless you have somebody whose dedicated job is understanding the compliance and the framework and what the gap is, you're having to do these constant gap assessments for where you are today and where you're going. If you instead take it as the aspirational approach and say, here are all the things that we're going to do, and you track and measure how you're doing against all those things. Again, this is something we talked about from the last question. Now you're talking about managing the risk and you can really only do that if you understand what the risks are and have some way of tracking progress towards those. And if you're not doing those things, guess what? It's a risk. And now you're able to put that onto the risk register and say, hey, we know that our policy says we're going to have session lockout in 15 minutes, and we're not doing it. Our session lockout right now is 24 hours. Okay, so there's some mitigation because you do have session lockout. There's a gap between what you're doing and what you should be doing or what you said you're going to do. And so what are you doing to close that gap, and how are you managing to reduce that time as you go? Or are you just accepting it, which is, again, accept is a perfectly valid response to risks, right? If you're in a high stakes environment and dealing with patient information and your doctors are leaving their screens unlocked and the next patient walks in and they're able to see the previous patient's medical records, probably not a good thing, right? So you want to have maybe a more aggressive session lockout for the terminals that are in use in your clinic. However, if you're talking about the session timeout for your t-shirt ordering business, well, maybe it's not maybe the worst case scenario is that you get an order that comes in and right. So there are some mitigating factors there that you can put into place that maybe it doesn't matter how long the session timeout is, right? It's annoying for an end user when their bank times out after 3 minutes of inactivity, but then again, it's keeping them secure. So when they walk away from the shared terminal, or God forbid they leave their computer unlocked at the airport, which I have seen way too frequently recently, at least they're getting logged out of those things automatically, right? And so that's where understanding we'll beat this drum all day, every day. Understand the risk and the risk appetite for the business and for your clients, and help manage that risk to a level that is acceptable to them at a price point that they're willing to afford to pay for it. Right? That's what it really boils down to. And you can't do that if you don't understand what the gaps are, what the risks are. And so, Mike, I love your framing of new clients get a risk assessment, existing clients start with the policies and use that as your gap assessment, essentially, so you can track the things that need to get done and manage the risks accordingly. All right. Any final thoughts before we wrap up today?
No, I think we answered your question, Frank.
All right.
You know how to reach us if we didn't, but in case you don't, Jared, how can he reach us?
Yeah, so please, for anybody listening, if you have questions of your own that you want to ask, head over to blacksmithinfosec.com/ask. If you're not already following us, please smash that follow button. Help us grow the follower base. And if you like this episode, please share it with a friend. Again, the more we can get the message out there, the better for everybody. So thank you all and have a great day. Get NIST-y.